I moved to Hemsley-on-Pine in the spring, the kind of season where the trees haven't quite agreed whether they're still dead or coming back to life. The tentative lull between frost and bloom that always made me feel like the world itself was holding its breath. I'd come from New York, or rather I'd fled it, after being unceremoniously fired from a job that had eaten more of me than I'd ever admitted out loud. A mid-tier investment banking position, one of those grind-yourself-to-bone roles where your 12-hour days were expected and 20-hour days were quietly admired. It was a sort of life where you measured your self-worth in line items and caffeine, and everyone pretended that burnout was just a form of excellence. When the layoff came, a merger, a restructuring, some empty phrase like that, I tried to see it as a blessing. I bought a second-hand car, looked up quiet towns, told myself I'd bake or hike or grow tomatoes, like those ex-urbanites online who find themselves through fresh air and compost. Maybe I said I wanted peace or perspective, but really, I was just tired. Not just of work, but of noise. Sirens at 2 a.m., blinking screens, small talk in crowded elevators. I wanted smaller, slower, quieter. Still, I braced for the usual disappointments. Boredom, passive-aggressive locals, the sort of loneliness people romanticize in Instagram captions but drink away in real life. I expected worn-out diners, the same dozen names in the paper, and a vague sense that I'd never quite belong. Instead, I got mail delivered to the minute, as if the postman moved to a metronome, a town bus that arrived with the precision of a ticking watch, the driver nodding like it was rehearsed, neighbors who waved, smiled, remembered my name, and brought me casseroles without asking. People who felt warm and familiar from day one, like I'd always been there. And I got a job, a simple one, working records and permits at the local municipal office, where the pace was gentle, the house fair, and the boss, a neat little woman named Joyce, baked the most fragrant sesame banana bread every Thursday without fail. Not just good, exceptional. Moist, warm, delicately sweet with a kind of nostalgic comfort I couldn't quite place. She never skipped a week. It was perfect, idyllic even. Like the best parts of small-town life had been gathered up, polished clean, and arranged just so. Everything functioned. Everyone seemed content. It was as if I'd stepped sideways out of time and into some polished diorama of how life ought to be. Curated, serene, and strangely immune to disorder. There were a few little habits you noticed the longer you lived here. Everyone had this funny way of greeting you, a kind of half-formal warmth, always the same phrase. Hello, how have you been up to? Odd turn of words, but endearing in its consistency. The wave, too, just a small, tidy flick of the hand at chest height, palm out. Practice, like the kind of thing you'd learn at a community etiquette class, if such a thing existed. I chalked it up to regional charm. Every place has its quirks, right? I came to fall in love with the place, and with its isolation. There was only one road in or out of town, heading north. The kind of narrow two-lane that vanished into mist come morning. The rest of Hemsley-on-Pine was wrapped in wood so dense and green they felt like the edge of some forgotten world. The trees rose like old cathedral spires, and when the fog drifted in, which it often did, it painted everything in soft light, branches fading into gauzy outlines, the forest floor dappled with muted color. It was the kind of beauty that made you pause mid-step without quite knowing why. Most weekends, I hiked the trails alone. They curled through groves of spruce and cedar, soft and fragrant underfoot, leading past shallow streams and mossy boulders that looked as though they'd been set there with intention. Some of the stones were smooth and sun-warmed, perfect for sitting and losing hours to birdsong. Others loomed, ancient and cracked, the kind that made you imagine prehistoric beasts curled atop them in another era. There were quiet meadows scattered here and there, full of tall grass that swayed like water and glowed gold in the late afternoon. The forest felt generous, like it had opened itself to me. It didn't just surround the town, it held it, cradled it, in the way a good parent might. And in that quiet, dappled green, I started to believe I might actually belong somewhere again. There was, however, one trail that went south. It wasn't locked or gated, just discouraged. Every time I asked about it, the answer was the same. Oh, there's nothing out there but old pines and poison ivy. Of course I went. How bad could it be? It was late afternoon when I did, a Saturday when the sun took its time leaving. The trail was surprisingly well trodden, at least at first. Then the path thinned, the markers vanished, and the trees started leaning in a little too close. I should have turned back when the woods started to stretch. It felt like I was walking forever. The sky darkened too quickly, and the silence got dense. The usual trail markers were gone. No painted blazes, no signposts, just forest, unbroken, and yet the path continued, faint but unmistakable, like something had walked it often enough to leave a memory behind. I told myself I'd go just a little farther. The canopy above thickened, blotting out the last of the afternoon sun, and time had gotten hard to track. The air felt denser here, not heavy exactly, just full, like it had been waiting a long while for someone to breathe it in. My footsteps sounded distant, like they were happening somewhere else. Still, the forest wasn't hostile, just quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Then I noticed something odd. At first, it was just the arrangement of a few logs by the side of the path, stacked deliberately, almost symmetrically, like a bench. A little farther on, a flat stone with smooth edges sat beside a small pile of pebbles arranged into a crude bowl shape. I thought maybe I'd stumbled on an old campsite, but the further I walked, the stranger the shapes became. A fence, or what looked like one, made of split branches and lashed vines. A narrow post stuck in the earth, supporting a makeshift sign. The lettering was uneven, scorched into the wood. I had to get close to read it. Stop. It wasn't a warning, it was a replica, a copy of something that didn't belong out here. The trail curved again, and that's when I saw the buildings. They emerged gradually, half concealed by foliage, not real houses, not really, just outlines of them, bark and mud pressed into the shapes of walls, moss thatched into uneven roofs. One had a stoop made of flat stones. Another had empty window frames strung with ivy-like curtains. They were wrong, somehow. Not in a grotesque way, just off, like someone had tried to recreate a town from memory, but had never actually seen one up close. And then came the figures. Not all at once, just a flicker of color in the corner of my eye. A shoulder, then the curve of a painted cheek glimpsed through the leaves. A hand, rigid and pale, holding something that might have once aspired to be a fishing rod. They weren't grouped together, but spaced out across the clearing like the cast of a play frozen in the wings, each waiting for their cue. At first, I thought they were art installations, primitive maybe, someone's grand experiment in nature sculpture, but they were full-sized, unmistakably human in proportion, dressed in real clothes or things that looked close enough. Flannel shirts, canvas aprons, weathered jeans that sagged just right at the knees. Their faces were painted, flat and bright, cartoonish in some ways, but not grotesque, just simplified. Expression boiled down to iconography, a round red mouth, black ovals for eyes, a careful, deliberate mustache rendered in stiff, uneven brushstrokes. One wore a child's backpack with faded stars on the fabric, the kind you'd find in a lost and found bin at a school. They weren't just standing, they were acting. One leaned behind a wooden slab, hands positioned just so, elbows bent, torso tilted, like he was ringing up groceries at a register that didn't exist. Another sat cross-legged on a stump, back straight, eyes fixed on a slab of bark balanced in its lap, shaped vaguely like a laptop. There was a couple seated beneath the lopsided wooden sign that read "Park," arms looped around one another, heads tilted together at that exact angle of affectionate boredom. They stared out at nothing, like they were watching a movie I couldn't see. I moved slowly through them, not touching anything, not sure I was even meant to. Everything felt intentional, reverent almost, like a ritual someone had tried very hard to preserve. The deeper I went, the more scenes I found. A figure sitting at a bus stop, hand half raised. Another crouched beside a mailbox, one hand outstretched mid-drop. A man, mid-stroke, caught in the motion of a morning jog. his expression locked somewhere between exertion and serenity. It was strange, yes, but also beautiful, in a way I hadn't expected. There was a kind of earnestness to it, like a child drawing come to life. Someone, or something, had tried very hard to recreate a world they'd only glimpsed, like they'd watched humanity from the edges and decided to pay tribute. I stood there for what could have been minutes or hours, the forest silent around me, the figures unmoving but somehow full of presence. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be seeing, but I couldn't look away. When I snapped back into reality, I left quickly, didn't run, but walked fast enough that I was sweating when I got back to the trailhead. The next day I told a few neighbors. They listened, nodded, then gave me the same response. "Ah, yes. I think that was some old art project. Don't pay it any mind. Don't bother going back." I didn't, for a while, but it stuck in my head, the town of mannequins, the peculiar reverence with which they were placed and positioned, like a crude screenshot of town life. Weeks later, I went again. I didn't plan to, not really. I told myself I just wanted fresh air, a longer walk than usual. I packed a lunch, filled a thermos, left before the sun had properly risen. I didn't mention it to anyone. The forest was quiet that morning, the light a hazy gold filtering through misted branches. It felt softer somehow, more forgiving, like the trees had agreed not to crowd so close. The trail to the south, the one no one had talked about, was exactly where I remembered it, still half obscured by overgrowth, still giving the sense that it wasn't meant to be noticed. I walked. It was still there. That odd, impossible clearing, nestled like a secret between ancient oaks. The same bark-walled homes, the same mossy grocery front, the same crooked sign reading park. But it looked cleaner, tidier, as if someone had taken the time to dust the leaves off the stoops, straighten the mannequins' postures, repaint the fading lines of their smiles. The forest hadn't reclaimed it. If anything, it had been maintained. That was the first thing that unsettled me. The second was the figure on the porch. It hadn't been there before, or at least I didn't remember it. A woman, maybe, in a long brown skirt. She was seated beside a wicker basket, her hands frozen mid-fold. But as I moved, just a few steps to the right, I had the oddest feeling her head turned with me. I stopped, stared. She hadn't moved. Her chin was still tilted forward, her gaze directed vaguely downward. I circled slightly. The angle of her face seemed different now, a little more to the left. I blinked hard, rubbed the side of my face. It was early. Maybe I was tired, maybe I just didn't remember the position clearly. My stomach felt tight in that dull, hollow way, like I hadn't eaten in days. I walked on. The figures were changed. Not all of them. Some still stood where they had before, but a few had shifted positions. One that I directly remembered sitting outside the cafe was now inside, visible through a bark-framed window, seated alone at a slab table. Another, once perched on a log near the library, now stood upright on a porch, one hand raised to its brow like it was shielding its eyes from the sun, or watching. I stopped again. I could see the figure at the bus stop. It hadn't moved. Same clothes, same posture, same head slightly cocked, as if listening. I stared at it for a long while my breath caught somewhere in my chest. I don't know why, I just had this feeling, a tautness in the air, like before a thunderclap. Then it moved. The arm rose stiffly, the hand turned out. It waved. Exactly once, a neat, mechanical arc. I didn't breathe, couldn't. Then, with the same stilted grace, it turned away. The whole torso rotated a few degrees, shoulders squared to the forest again, still, as though nothing had happened at all. I stood there for a long time. Eventually, I went home, quietly, slowly. I didn't tell anyone, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to begin. Life resumed its rhythm. Mail on time, banana bread Thursdays, the town bus hissing up to the curb with its usual, almost theatrical punctuality. Back to the same, familiar, eccentric, how have you been up to's. I tried not to think about the woods, about that strange clearing. I told myself it had been a fluke, a fever dream, maybe, a trick of tired eyes and early light. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in my day-to-day. So I buried it, wrapped it up in routine and silence, pushed it to the back of my mind and let it settle there, like silt in still water. One day, I saw the map. It was tacked to the bulletin board at the bus stop, an old laminated thing with faded ink and curled corners. I glanced at it a dozen times before without paying it much mind. This time, something caught my eye. A name I didn't recognize. Ingram's Hollow. There it was, plainly printed, just a few miles down the road leading south out of town. The road leading south out of town? The map showed a second road, heading south, marked clearly, as if it had always been there. I stared at it longer than I meant to. I even looked around, half expecting someone to laugh, to admit it was a prank or an update I'd missed, but nobody said anything. People came and went as always, boarding the bus or waiting with thermoses in hand, nodding at me in passing. Later that afternoon, I brought it up to my neighbor, Carol, retired teacher, enthusiastic gardener, known for her peach cobbler. Ingram's Hollow, I asked. Was that always there? She blinked, puzzled for a moment before smiling.
Of course, why wouldn't it be? I took my grandson there last fall for the fishing, just down the ridge past the old fire road. Lovely spot.
I thought there was nothing out there but poison ivy. She laughed.
You must be thinking of somewhere else.
I went the next day, just after lunch. The weather was overcast, a dull gray light pressing down from above like a held breath. And there it was, a road. Paved, pristine, lined with reflective markers that hadn't been there before. The kind of road that looked freshly laid, too clean to have existed unnoticed for long. But no one else seemed to think it strange. The drive was short, 10, maybe 15 minutes, but the scenery changed fast. The woods pulled back like curtains, opening onto low hills and tidy plots of land. A wooden sign greeted me in tasteful serif, "Welcome to Ingram's Hollow." Beneath it, a smaller plaque read, EST 1936. The town unfolded neatly beyond it. Rows of homes with fresh white siding and flower boxes beneath the windows. Storefronts with cheerful awnings, smooth sidewalks, people moving through it all with a kind of gentle, rehearsed purpose. A woman pushing a stroller, a man sweeping his porch, a group of teens eating ice cream on a bench, all laughing just a little too in sync. It was lovely, picture perfect, like a magazine ad for small town living. I parked near the center and got out slowly, my feet crunching on gravel. Something about it all made my skin buzz. I wondered, the layout was unfamiliar, but the feeling, the rhythm of the place wasn't. Everything seemed to fall into place too easily. I passed a grocery store with a bell above the door, and a schoolhouse with a fresh chalk drawings on the sidewalk. In the park, a few children kicked a ball while an elderly man read from a large print novel on a bench, smiling to himself. I kept walking, turning corners without thinking, drawn forward by something I couldn't name. And then I saw him, the man at the bus stop. He turned stiffly to face me. He raised one hand in a crisp, practiced motion. "Hello," he said, his voice bright and flat. "How have you been up to?" That was some really, really good writing. I really liked the way that the author painted the picture of the fog and the town and the forest. It was all really good. Honestly, I wish this went on longer. I wish this was like a 40-minute story about an adventure. The story that it reminds me of is Harold. I actually don't remember what title I gave the story on YouTube, but the name of the story was Harold, and I posted it a few months ago. I really liked that story, and this one kind of gave me a similar vibe. Maybe the author will make a part 2. That'd be super interesting, and I'd love to read that and explore the mystery of Ingrid's Hollow. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this story. I know I said I wouldn't be doing short ones. This is a shorter one. I have an hour and 42-minute story coming out on Thursday. You're hearing this on a Monday or Tuesday or whatnot. On Thursday, it's an hour and 42 minute story coming out. So take some time to edit that one, and to make sure I get it out within the week, I'm doing a little bit of a shorter one here. So yeah, sorry, but it'll be really worth it. That 1 hour, 42-minute story is absolutely incredible. You are going to love it. So yeah, I will see you in that one in a couple days here. I hope you enjoyed this one. Make sure to hit all the buttons below. Thank you so much to the author for letting me read this. Very well written. Please write more. I'll see you all in the next. Ego Volt Anima Vestra.